Joe lay there burning in the heat of the desert, unable to crawl any more. He reached into the pocket of his issued shirt and retrieved a picture. He managed to raise it up towards the sky to look at his little girl, smiling so bright, wearing the yellow dress that he bought for her before this last deployment. His hand and her image blotted out the burning sun. Pain washed over his entire body as he prayed silently. Blackness enveloped his consciousness as his raised hand fell back to the rocky earth, his hand never losing its grip on the photo. Mercy made her way through the jagged rocks, staying low as her father taught her to do to avoid detection from the soldiers that frequently patrolled the mountains that is their home. Mercy, her dog, and her father and mother had to leave their home and move further into the desert cliffs to hide from the violence of war that governments had created. The conflict had scattered her entire small village. They had been living and hiding for months in a shelter built by her father. He made it with dry stacked stones and a tarp that he covered with brush and sand for camouflage. It was small and cramped, but created shade and respite from the cruel heat of the high mountain desert sun. Mercy carefully crept silently so she could listen intently for her dog, whom had wandered away from her just before daybreak. She knew that the heat, a wild animal, or a raptor could kill her beloved companion if she did not find her soon. She slowly raised her head over the outcropping of rock. Her dark black hair contrasted the brightness of the sun-bleached landscape. She scanned the horizon for clouds of sands rising up into the sky that would alert her of any military vehicles traveling through the desert. The bright blue sky shimmered in the distant heat waves and looked as if it were a great sea. She looked down onto the desert floor and saw a man on his back with outstretched arms. To her imagination, he looked like the cross that she had seen on her grandmother's altar at home. She stared silently to see if the soldier would move. She noticed a small ruddy shape appear next to the man she was studying. It was her little dog tugging on the man's battle uniform. "Gracie!" she said, excitedly, as quiet as a child could that was trying to maintain cover and express relief for finding her beloved companion. Mercy slowly descended the rocky slope while focused on the soldier. She did this contrary to the instructions from her father, who had told her never to approach a soldier, one from her own country or foreign. Her eyes never left her dog. As she reached the desert floor, she hid herself behind a boulder by crouching on her knees. Her head peeked from the side of the large rock. The sun sparkled in her deep blue eyes that intently watched her dog tug on the soldier's shirt collar. "He's not awake. Maybe he's dead," she reasoned to herself, and decided that a quick dash to retrieve Gracie was better than if she had called to her, for if there were more soldiers, they would surely hear her call. She ran over to the scene, crouched low as she had been taught long before this conflict began. Gracie took notice of her coming towards her and was ready to bark, but did not, because she saw a finger held to the lips of her master, Mercy, which means no barking. The dog waited silently as Mercy approached. Once there, she looked around and saw no one else save herself, her dog, and the soldier. "You have caused a great deal of trouble, Miss Gracie," she chastised the dog in a whisper. Her dog stared into her eyes with an apology as it sat with determination. Mercy scooped up her pup and nuzzled her, as she had done in peacetime. Her eyes searched the man's body and saw the carnage. She noticed his blistered lips and sunburned face. She searched him further and noticed the picture of a blue-eyed girl wearing a bright yellow dress that Joe still held firmly in his hand. Her eyes moved to his chest and studied him to see if he still breathed. The soldier's chest rose slightly, and she could hear his exhale. She followed the marks in the gravelly sand from the soldier. He had crawled all this way? She marveled as his tracks disappeared into the vast expanse of nothingness. Joe was determined to make it to the rocky outcropping, to hide from the killing heat, to rest. Mercy closed her eyes and was silent in prayer for a moment before she ran back to the rocks to hide. She sat in the shade of the boulder and debated on the instructions that she had received in prayer. Then she heard a whisper call of authority. Abu! It was her father looking for her. His voice washed down the rocks into her ears, bringing fear of his stern reproach for her wandering off. Abba! She called back in a whisper. She listened and heard her father creeping down to her. Once he reached her, he hugged her lovingly, and reproach was far from his heart at this moment. He stared into her blue eyes, and the fear of losing her was abated. Mercy pointed in the direction of the soldier. Her father's eyes followed her gesture and landed on Joe. Abba, we must help him, for God has told me so. Mercy's father's lip tightened in disagreement, but he also knows that his Abu would never lie about what God has told her. He scanned the horizon. He searched the empty blue sky. There were no other souls save themselves and the soldier. He then ran over to Joe and rolled him on his side and picked him up and slung him over his back and shoulders. He carried Joe back to where Mercy and Grace waited in the shade of the rocks and propped him against the boulder. He ran over to where Joe had laid and retrieved Joe's issued backpack and then came back to the rocks. He rifled through its contents and found some medical supplies, some water and food rations. He removed the ammunition from the outside pockets of the pack and buried it in the sand, along with Joe's pistol. He put all the supplies back into the pack and handed it to Mercy. She slung it over her one shoulder and picked up her dog. Her father once again carefully picked up the soldier and carried him up the rocky slope as Mercy and Grace followed close behind. The four of them crested the hill and disappeared over the ridge. It was late in the afternoon when they made it to the shelter that they call home. Mercy's father dragged Joe into their shelter, and his wife began to attend to his wounds. Mercy and her father cleared an area and padded it with their own clothes to make a bed for the soldier. They cleaned and dressed Joe's injuries and laid him down to rest. Mercy tugged at the picture but could not remove it from the unconscious soldier's firm grip. Her mother stroked her head and motioned her to leave the man to his rest. The three of them began to pray together. Time passed as they called on God for guidance, and the sun set, bringing relief from its stifling heat. Joe slept soundly through it all. Night came and brought the cool air. Mercy, her mother, and their dog slept on the far side of the shelter, while her father laid outside their makeshift home. He did not sleep, but kept his ears open to any sound that was not from the natural desert. The night passed slowly. They heard murmurings from Joe throughout the night, yet he did not move at all. The twilight time came, bringing its deep, dark blue light with it. Mercy's father sat propped up, scanning the horizon for trouble. His wife brought him a pouch of food that came from Joe's pack. He ate it as he kept watch. Then he found rest with the fullness of his belly. Mercy and her mother attended to Joe. They changed his bandages with new dressings and gave him water to drink. The water revived him enough to wake and hydrate. Then he fell back into sleep. The heat of the day came and went back into another night. Once again, Father kept watch on the horizon, as did Mercy and her mother did over the soldier. Morning light traced the eastern expanse and reached the hillside of the family's makeshift abode. Mercy's father lay sleeping, exhausted from the long, vigilant watches. A shadow overtook him, and this woke him with a start. He opened his eyes to see another soldier standing over him with a rifle pointing at him. Mercy's father froze in fear. The soldier just stood there waiting quietly on the other end of his rifle. Mercy's father feared for his wife and daughter that lay asleep inside their shelter. The rifleman yelled in a threatening tone, "What have you done with my man?" Mercy's father didn't move or answer for the terror of the weapon a few feet from his head. "If you don't answer, I'll shoot you." The soldier's anger kindled further. "Answer me! Where's my man?" he demanded as Mercy's father trembled and prayed silently. "You got one more chance to answer me. Where's my man?" The soldier screamed with authority. His finger rubbed the trigger of his weapon in readiness. His frustration grew in heat like the desert sun. "Where's my—" he shouted as he heard a weak voice come from inside the confines of the shelter say, "I'm in here, Vegas." The rifleman's finger rested its tension on the trigger. "You all right, medic?" he hollered into the hut. "Yeah," Joe managed to call out. "These people saved my life." The rifleman lowered his weapon and nodded to Mercy's father in gratitude. He reached his hand out to Mercy's father's, who took it, and then he pulled him to his feet. The two men stared into each other's eyes, where anger faded into gratitude and fear into empathy. The rifleman entered the shelter and talked with Joe as Mercy and her mother went outside to be with her father. They embraced and prayed. Vegas came out of the hut with Joe draped over his shoulders and carried him down the hillside. Joe turned his head and looked at the family that saved his life. he noticed the little girl named Mercy staring back at him with her deep blue eyes that reminded him of his daughter's own in the picture, which he still held tightly in his hand. Joe then passed out. The two soldiers disappeared from sight of the family as Vegas carried his friend down the rocky slope to his Humvee.